How is? I hope you had a good night's sleep. I had a terrible night's sleep, and I'm just not feeling right today. And well, there's no two ways of. I might as well come out and say this: that evil is on the march. I can feel it as clear as anything. It happened about when I had my dinner last night. After I finished my dinner, I was overcome with this sensation of evil. Was moving again, and it was very palpable and very dark. And I went on to social media to just see if there was any Renfields look around, and they were everywhere. And these are indicators that something appalling is going on at the macro level. Think of evil as being like a tree made of pure evil. Well, and there the leaves shaking and vibrating and reverbing on the end of it before the tree starts to move and it kills you like an evil ant. And the evil makes them shake. And sure enough, how you notice this on social media is people starting fights with other people, and people looking to start fights, huge amounts of passive aggressiveness, and all the crazies start doing things like showing animal gore porn and things like that. Now, it's not just on social media. It's if you see what's happening in the United States with in Minneapolis and the riots, it's this. I'm telling you, those things are definitely engineered by the deep state. I can feel it. I can feel it as clear as anything. The deep state is on the warpath. A huge part of this has to do with the fact that Trump signed that executive order on restraining social media content providers from being editorializing, being editors or being journalists, using their platforms for a journalistic slant. And I read the actual legislation, and it was very long and very complex, which suggests to me that this had been in process before Trump announced it the other day, and may have been the reason why Twitter put a fact check on one of his videos, that someone had leaked it out to the deep state that this was being worked upon. And the legislation is very complex, and it's also supported by the Attorney General. Now, the Attorney General is the second most powerful man in the United States. The Vice President is not the second most powerful man. He's there in case something happens to the President to enact legislation and be an administrator. The second most powerful person in a republic is the uh, Attorney General. Like, for instance, Peter Sutherland was the Attorney General here in Ireland, and he was also the head of the World Bank and Goldman Sachs and just about every fucking thing else. And so this guy, who's the Attorney General in the United States, looks like a decent guy and comes across as an honourable public servant. And he, basically what this legislation is, when the law was first enacted to protect social media companies, it was what became social media was in the early days of the internet about 25 years ago. And it was to protect companies who were starting up in business who had message boards or forums. So if, say, someone posted something libelous on a forum, just like you have in the radio stations or on TV, the actual the actual website host would not be libelous because it was an opinion made by someone else on an open forum. So it initially started out as a very, very good law. This was so the internet could grow without having to be hindered by legal action constantly. And so, so the idea was if somebody said something slanderous on the early internet against somebody, the internet provider would have the IP address and or the which was much more easy to identify back then, but it's still easy to identify, and if you have the right tools, and then the person who had made the libelous comment could be sued directly by the individual they made the slanderous comment about, and so the internet provider wouldn't be liable. If anything, if a paedophile posted a picture of a child being raped on a forum, the internet provider wouldn't be held responsible for it because they didn't sanction it, because it was an open public forum. Now, this changed drastically when the likes of Facebook and Twitter came along. They grew their power and they grew their size by being open public forums. So that's, and everyone went on, and it became a voice box for everyone, kind of a speaker's corner for everyone, and eventually that they started censoring opinions that were not radical or slanderous. So, for instance, yeah, they could censor an opinion if someone said something slanderous about someone else, but they couldn't. They wouldn't if somebody said, "I disagree with this political system," or I'm a member of this political party, or I align with this political, affiliation. They started censoring them, and then they went from that made them go from being open forum providers and onto being actual editorial. So they were controlling the discourse of free speech, and they have unprecedented power in history to do this. And this is why things have happened like David Icke has lost his YouTube account and his Facebook account, Alex Jones as well, lots of others. And this is because of a political, of a, a leftist, progressive, political editorialization on these forums like Twitter and Facebook and Google and all the others. So the law has changed, and it's very significant. There's two things for this, and it's very what Trump has done, and the lawmakers in the U.S. is really quite radical by any standards. He quite rightly pointed out that these internet providers would do things like build websites and search engines for the Chinese government, and then make it so you couldn't find out that a Chinese citizen couldn't find out that their government had been involved in human rights violations. So therefore, Trump's attitude was, if these people are building search engines for doing that in China, they have no right to any kind of protection of free speech laws. He's absolutely right about that. So the legislation prevents them from doing what they've been doing to this point. And it actually goes much further. If they are caught, when this thing goes to the federal government, if they are caught, and it will actually be at the state and federal level, if they are caught censoring a political opinion, they are liable for financial or legal action. So they're basically falling under similar rules to what the FCC function under in the radio and the TV, mainstream terrestrial radio and digital radio and TV in America. This is a phenomenal step forward in the fight against the deep state. Now, the deep state obviously knew this was coming. You know me, like everyone knows me, right? I am the last person in the world to say false flag. I believe that most terrorist attacks are just that, jihadists and crazies, because that's always been that way. At the same time, too, I see how these terrorist attacks also benefit the control grid. It allows them to implement more security measures and lock down the rest of us for their own benefit, not for the benefit of catching the terrorists. And I'm not saying every terrorist event wasn't a false flag, but most are not false flags. Okay. And this is one of the problems. I can't stand the truthers. They think that there's no such thing as terrorism. It's all every single thing is caused by the Illuminati. Now, what's happening in Minneapolis is absolutely being a false flag. I'm not saying that the murder of that man isn't a false flag. I'm saying the reaction to it. You can see it. All the deep state elements are out there. To see a reporter from MSNBC, which is a deep state affiliate, standing while the city is burning in flames behind him, and people are going nuts, and then he's saying the rioters are well behaved. What he's really saying is riot more, keep rioting. and he's been given that sanction by his bosses to do that. Just like in the old days when you had on CNN, when it was so deeply entrenched in the Bush senior administration, the first Iraq war, you had CNN reporters in fucking studios with potted plants of uh, cactus and palm trees behind them and cardboard sets, pretending that they were in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, when it was clear as anything they were on a set indoors. And then you hear a siren blowing during a fake bogus news report, and they start putting on their gas masks, and it was all completely staged. Look that up. Look that up on YouTube if you don't believe me. It's unbelievable. And that was the deep state when the deep state were in power and the deep state had the media. And it's the same reason why this legislation that was brought again by Trump the other day was always there. It's just that the deep state was on this, had the media. Twitter was working for Trump, working for Clinton, working for the Bushes, working for that neocon heritage. And Trump is not one of them, so it worked against them. And so he unleashed the law on them. And this is, you mark my words, we're dealing in a war. This is a war, a philosophical war going on. And what's happening, absolutely, it's a false flag in Minneapolis. That's agent provocateurs down there, probably left-wing radicals whose parents, Ivy League school left-wing radicals organising the whole thing, just like the Cambridge, Oxbridge types organised the riots in Britain, and just like the Jesuit big snob ones here operate the left-wing extremists here. Now it's fascinating to watch this because we get an insight to the Renfielding, that goes on. And like as a friend of mine said, you could see them actually running the program. It's gone from the virtue signaling of wearing a mask and the lockdown is great program, and they're now running the Black Lives Matter program. And you have celebrities who are whiter than me saying things like, I support Black Lives Matter. It's a war against the white race and I'm on the side of the black people. I mean, this is all, I know it's hilarious and it's ridiculous, but it's deep state stuff. It's a deep state tactic. And this is to try and, because there's no one in the deep state who could run for election to even remotely challenge Donald Trump. The only way they can do this now is to sabotage the next 4 years. And this is the opening salvo of what is really a philosophical war with what he calls the unseen enemy. Sure, the coronavirus is real. Sure, it's killed old people and sick people with cancer and a few young people too. But, the lockdown was not necessary. And I think Trump went along with it just to see how they would react if he went along with it. Because they couldn't, because if he was the whole damned if he did, damned if he didn't thing. And I know that all politicians get that, but he gets that to the extreme. And you can see now the deep state. Now, when I said yesterday, I just felt, okay, what things like Minneapolis and other things like that are, as well as all the Renfields and all the hysterics and all the lunatics on the internet, picking fights on each other, extreme passive aggressiveness, tackling each other, the mentally ill, and the ones who do this. Always observe the mentally ill. The mentally ill are your key to understanding the world, because they are the Renfields who react to the vibrations of the greater evil of the deep state. And at the margins, they are the leaves, like I said, who reverberate what's going on inside. Always pay attention. And they were all fired up late last night. So I was saying, okay, there's something going down. What it is, I think, what they're doing is they're going to go for something now. Coronavirus is losing its zeal. Most people are not, even Charlie Veitch, we'll talk about him in a second, but it's losing its zeal. And they're going to have its charisma, its pathological charisma, and they're going to try and unleash something too. Now, the funny thing is, the first thing I walked out when I saw yesterday was the crescent moon. And I kept noticing the crescent moon yesterday in the daytime and in the evening. I'm not going to say there's going to be a jihadist attack, being that the crescent moon represents the crescent of the flag, the sword of Islam. I'm not going to say that, but I wouldn't be surprised, put it that way, if I was getting some kind of, archetypal resonator And again, some terrorist attacks like are I wouldn't say false flags, but like 9/11, they were collusions. The 7/7 bombing in London, they were collusions. Then you have other terrorist attacks that are the real thing, but then you have others, but you also have collusions where the security system steps out of the way or provides advantageous openings for jihadists. They're not like they sit down and they plan these things and put fellas in brown makeup and make them wear turbans. It's not like that at all. Those guys who flew the planes into the World Trade Center were real terrorists. It's just that, should we say, they were accommodated, and that's what the five dancing Israelis knew when they were jumping up and down on the van in New Jersey watching the attacks. Now, and that's as far as conspiracy as I go. I'm not one of these people. I need good evidence before I even look twice at a conspiracy. I'm not like normally prone to these things. Not 99% of conspiracies are bullshit. They're not conspiracies, but there's 1% that are, and that's I will acknowledge when they are. Now I won't say 99%. I say 90%, and so I'll acknowledge when the 10% are. They definitely show signs of it. So we could be looking at something very strange. Now remember, don't get upset. This is the darkness before the dawn. This shows how, if the deep state have to get a reporter standing in the middle of a burning, riotous city and say people are not being unruly, it's really showing us that they're starting to go insane. And this is why I'm saying pay careful attention to the insane at the moment. Pay careful attention to them. And because we're going to see insanity at the very top of the deep state. And I have to say, this law that Trump has enacted has rattled the fucking shit out of them. And they did not expect this, because they always thought they would own the media and then own the future. And so the reason why they haven't